warm welcome to the Philips Africa Dialogues. I'm Kukuletu Mfupi. Well, Africa is endowed with an abundance of natural energy resources. However, most remain untapped, with a large portion of the continent actively struggling with severe power shortages. In this time, or rather in this final edition of the Philips Africa Dialogues for 2013, we'll be taking a closer look at the solutions and partnerships needed in order to bring reliable, efficient and environmentally sound lighting and energy solutions to countries across the African continent. Joining me in studio today to share their insights is Andre Demel. He's the General Manager for Philips Lighting Africa. Barry Brennenkamp, Senior Manager for Energy Efficiency at the South African National Energy Development Institute. Andrew Eitzinger, Senior General Manager for Integrated Demand Management, as well as spokesperson at Eskom. And from our bureau in Abuja is Bex Dagogo Jack, Chairman for the Presidential Task Force on Power in Nigeria. And we're also joined by our in-studio audience. But before we break up, or rather get to the nitty-gritties of this power discussion, I'd like each of our panelists to give us just some background as to the organizations that you represent, as well as the role that you play in energy. And Bex, I'd like us to start off with you in Nigeria. Bex Dagogo, could you give us a brief background as to what role you play with regard to sourcing power as well as creating energy for the African continent, but more specifically in Nigeria?
Thank you very much. I would like to bring audience to the knowledge of the fact that about 3 years ago, sometime in 2010, the current president identified power as one of his deliverables and on top of his agenda. Following that, he put together certain agencies, the Presidential Task Force on Power and the Presidential Action Committee on Power. These two agencies are ad hoc in nature, but they were essentially saddled with the responsibility of creating a roadmap and delivering the roadmap to take Nigeria away from previously vertically integrated power utility sector to a private sector market mode driven electricity market. Electricity industry, So this program is intensive and extensive. It was designed to take away utilities previously managed by government and divested into private sector ownership. And also it involved putting together a regulatory framework that will enable private investors to come into the market. It also provided securities and also incentives to enable the young market grow into a sustainable electricity industry. The Presidential Task Force on Power essentially is the facilitator of the delivery of the roadmap milestones and worked with the different agencies to set their targets for them, to monitor their targets, to report on lapses, to make recommendations for reviews, and in short, to get the government stay focused on the agenda until the last milestone is delivered. And as of November the 1st, all the government assets were divested to private sector ownership, which has pretty much taken the market to a point of irreversibility in terms of transition from public to private sector ownership and operation.
Bex, no doubt energy featuring quite high on the Nigerian government's list there, and also new partnerships between the public and private sector. But Andre, your perspective on things. Philips, you've been lighting up the continent for some time now.
Yeah, it's a dark continent actually, from the history when you see this. Philips has 3 different sectors. One is for healthcare, one is for consumer lifestyle, as we call this. Another one is for lighting. I'm heading the lighting business in Africa. And I think one of the biggest challenges to light up this continent, and there are a couple of methodologies to do so. We have on-grid and off-grid solutions, and to being part of the transition of a technology what is very old. I mean, the light bulb was invented almost 100 years ago. And coming to LED, what gives us more efficiency, combine this with solar, this gives a solution for rural off-grid areas, what could really lift up the continent to a lit up continent actually.
Well, let's hope so. Barry, coming to you, you represent SANEDI, if I can refer to it as that. The role that you've played in bringing about energy to South Africa as well as the continent.
Yes, Gugu. SANEDI is a state-owned entity in South Africa. It's an agency reporting to the Department of Energy. And our key mandate is to help the Department of Energy and the various myriad of stakeholders in this field in South Africa to accelerate the transition to a low-carbon economy. I personally have been very involved in lighting, being part of the team that set up the Efficient Lighting Initiative in South Africa about 12 years ago, which kick-started the process to lighting South Africa and accelerating the process to efficient lighting in South Africa. And we're still working in this area to see the next generation of transition from compact fluorescent lamps to LED lights.
Well, let's hope so. And Andrew, coming to you, you're from a company that every South African must be familiar with, Eskom.
Oh, sure. Sure, and of course Eskom's mandate is to keep the lights on, and it's my job within Eskom to make sure that that light is energy efficient. But of course we can't do it alone. We work together with Barry and together with Andre and all our customers and suppliers to bring about a change as soon as possible to energy efficiency, because that gap and that space that we get through lower demand is really essential at the moment, once again, to keep the lights on, to power our economy and to take our rate of electrification all the way to 100%. We're at about 80% at the moment, so very different to the rest of Africa, as we're hearing from Nigeria, for example. But 80 is still not good enough. We've taken it from 30 to 80, it's now 80 to 100, but we need the capacity to do that.
Just walk us through some of the successes that have been achieved, maybe from a local perspective, before we cross over to Nigeria, just to understand the milestones that we've managed to achieve regarding power.
Certainly. Well, South Africa has been blessed with coal, and I'm going to take Barry's point about carbon. Of course, that we have to move ultimately away from a economy and a power sector which is dominated by carbon. But we have managed over the past decades to make good use of the coal reserves to provide the world's lowest cost abundant electricity, and we've seen massive industrialization and economic growth on the basis of that. Unfortunately, and strange, of course, on just remembering Madiba and the contribution that he made. Unfortunately, and that's a very sad thing for the country, we left most of our population behind. Electricity was a privilege and reserved for whites. And of course, what we've done really is work very hard to make sure that has been corrected. Going forward, and this is what Eskom has been very proud of, we have really worked very hard on electrification to make sure that all South Africans enjoy the benefits of electricity, even before the demise of apartheid. So that is our proud legacy, that electricity for all has been what we've stood for, even when it was politically incorrect to do that. Excuse me?
Have you got any numbers perhaps as to how many households you've managed to light up?
Sure, we had about
the last 20 years, perhaps?
Sure, 4.5 million been lit up over the last 20 years. And once again, in the rural areas, there are still areas which are not electrified. Of course, it's costing a lot of money and time to extend our networks into the deep rural areas, but we're committed to do that, and we'll continue to make sure that we really make sure that South Africa is permanently taken out of darkness, that every South African enjoys electricity.
Bix, I'd like to come to you for a moment in Nigeria. We've heard here from Andrew that no doubt Eskom has definitely achieved milestones in bringing power to the South African community at large. In Nigeria, I understand that this process is unfolding a lot slower, though.
From the perspective I just gave you, you'll realize that we've just transited from a very largely dysfunctional electricity sector, dominated by government control, and just mileaging ourselves into a regular private sector industry. It will come with teaching challenges, as you know. It will come with learning challenges, as you know. But our fundamentals are very strong. We have a huge population. We have several urban cities marked by 36 state capitals. Each of them is pretty much a standard urban environment. So the demand is huge. To that extent, we believe that if we get the incentives right, if we get the regulatory framework right, if we have the government play correct, then there will be a flourish of investment activities in the next couple of years that should try to match our demand with supply.
Barry, I'd like to pick up on the pointers that Bex made there with regard to the shift moving from the public sector to more corporate structure regarding energy provision, whereas in South Africa, Eskom is a state-owned entity. Seems as though there is no one-size-fits-all resolution to power problems on the continent.
Yes, there's different models for different countries. I think in a developing context, the model that we have now with a vertically integrated utility, a very powerful utility, is probably the right way to go. We have a problem in that Eskom distributes electricity to a number of individual consumers, but in the main they distribute electricity to around about 300 municipalities, 286 municipalities, who then, after buying it from Eskom, then distribute it or reticulate it to the end-use consumers. Now, the biggest problem with that, I don't think the consumer is pretty worried about what model is. It's about keeping the costs and containing the costs low. That's what the end user does. He wants the kilowatt hour to be delivered at the cheapest price. So whatever model works that can retain the prices at the lowest possible rates is a model that should work for that country.
Low cost is also something that is on top of everyone's agenda, in particular maybe even the private sector. A lot of mining as well as manufacturing firms use power as a primary source of getting their goods out there. I'm not sure if you've liaised with some of the guys at the bottom of the ranks with regard to cutting the cost of power provision.
Well, let me give you an answer in two parts. I mean, distribution and production of energy is one part. But whatever we do, Africa is the continent with a rising population without electricity in the world. There's only one continent in the world where the people being in darkness will increase in the future. And the reason is simply that we talk about distribution or production of energy. We will not be able to deliver the energy to all villages, to all huts in Africa. So the solution to this could be an off-grid solution. And coming back to your question about the...
What does off-grid and on-grid mean?
Off-grid means actually, off-grid is you go home, you live in a nice city and you have a plug, you have your radio, your TV, your plug in and it works. But if you go to a rural area, and you will see there's no cable going to this rural area. South Africa made big steps ahead. Nigeria has big plans about this. Unfortunately, a lot of countries, the landscape of the country doesn't allow it. If you look to Egypt, for instance, everybody lives on the Nile. It's beautiful. You lay one cable and everything is done. But how can we provide electricity and light to rural areas across Africa? And it has to be cost efficient, no doubt about this. And I think technologies, and this is what I'm talking about, is not increasing capacity is what is needed for sure, but how we can reduce the demand. If we move from energy, high energy consumption lamps like GLS lamps, only these lamps with a screw, right, to CFLI or to LED, this will reduce the energy consumption by 50–80%. And this is the way we want to go for it. So develop the market in a way, educate people that they are able to understand technology, what is off-grid, what is on-grid, providing solutions, cost-efficient solutions to people. And do not forget, if we talk about the rural area, I'm not competing as a company with on-grid or off-grid. I'm competing with kerosene. I'm competing with firewood, because this is what people use right now to light up their houses. And all the danger behind this. So the thing is, how can we educate and how we can change policy in a way that people are used to those technologies and are able to pay for those technologies?
I'd like us to continue with the off-grid point, and perhaps you can help us out, Andrew, coming from Eskom. Naturally, you've achieved milestones by lighting up villages in the country, but there are many more places in South Africa that don't have the power. Infrastructure, we know, is a key issue across many of the African countries, and no doubt that is an issue for an entity like Eskom. How do we work around that problem, getting people more on the grid, if that's the correct word to use?
Sure. Our core business is around the grid. And I think Andres explained the different models, but our core business is building large power stations, transmitting that all around the country, and then at lower voltages taking smaller lines to all businesses and all homes. That's our traditional business model. But that is going to change as we see renewable energy and smaller power stations and new technologies being developed. So Eskom will, no doubt, in the future also be looking at perhaps not off-grid in the sense that Andres talked about it, but what we refer to as microgrids. This is where you would see a power station not necessarily connected to the overall power grid, but there would be a power station which would feed feed a particular village without that village needing to actually be electrically connected to the main power grid. So there's various models which are being looked at the moment, and what's very clear is that the central utility, like Eskom, is being severely challenged. Our business model in 100 years simply won't exist anymore. It's going to be down to smaller microgrid, off-grid, what's called distributed generation, where you would see particularly renewable power stations being solar, wind, a range of different technologies popping up all over the place, and customers and villages and communities actually connecting themselves. And I think this would be a great model for Africa as well. So I think the wrong thing to start would be to try and do central utilities in all countries around Africa. That's not the way to go. I think we've got a great opportunity to learn from the trends elsewhere in the world and to do it right the first time. And we'd support Philips in that move.
Biggs, I'd like to come to you. No doubt energy, as you mentioned earlier, is a key focus for a country like Nigeria. But what kind of formula are you looking at? We heard Andrew mentioning here that just having a central power station is not the way to go forward anymore, but rather ensuring that there is the implementation of microgrids, to use his wording there. In Nigeria, are you using a similar formula perhaps?
Yes, I would say that we are still, in terms of policy, very largely a work in progress, but we're taking our paradigms, our examples from existing jurisdictions that compare favorably with our own economic fundamentals, our size and our scale. Obviously, we do have excess natural gas that we've been flaring for several decades now. So by way of fuel mix, natural gas is a lead preference, but we do also have a lot of coal. We haven't done the right thing in terms of developing infrastructure around coal mining and exploitation. But going forward, there's an increasing indication of government interest to tap into that fuel base as an option. We do have, as you know, all through Africa, a lot of sun and a lot of wind. All of these resources are being plugged in, especially as we have discussed, for off-grid applications. Nigeria is there about 923,000 square kilometers, but when you compare us to Ethiopia, Sudan, we're actually like half the size of these countries. So across Africa, you have a huge landmass per country, and with a lot of cluster communities that are located at different segments, different corners of that huge landmass. So being able to build a national grid that connects every nook and cranny could be just unwieldy and actually impracticable. So the idea of having standalone grids that deal with cluster requirements, it's a key policy angle that the government is looking at. We are also looking at just making that a commercial project rather than a welfare project. So to that extent, there's a model we're looking at where the industries will be located as part of the capital cost of building the standalone power. So the small or medium industry will be the vector for bringing population back to that community and then transit to community capacity to pay. Because if you don't have any captive industry upon which the community builds their vocation and their revenue base, then it will be impossible to have any kind of commercial electricity model. So we want to take it between the demand for productivity, industrial or commercial productivity, as a backbone for electricity investment so that communities can grow around both the industry and the electricity in a commercially viable way, not to take away the fact that there must be subsidy at different phases of the development. Our off-grid solution has what they call a different tariff structure that enables a feed-in tariff structure that enables investors to operate outside the regulated tariff benchmark, tariff threshold, with recognition of the fact that their technology is slightly more expensive, their recovery time is also different, and to that extent, their tariff level will be higher. So there is enough policy provisions for off-grid to grow on its own. It just depends on the investment interest. And one or two pilot projects who are successful, which get successful will incentivize more traffic in that area. But the demand is certainly there.
Indeed, the demand is there. And as I look across the desk, there are a lot of serious faces here. This is supposed to be an electrifying, energizing discussion because the prospects look good, don't they, Brendan? Barry, from what I understand, using this new model regarding the mini grids that Andrew referred to is a positive. But what's been the delay in getting us here so far?
It's very positive because, you know, in a country like South Africa, your power stations are constructed around the coal fields, which are predominantly the eastern part of the country. And you have large demands for energy in Cape Town, for example. So you've got to transmit this energy a long way and you have huge losses. So before anyone's even used it, you've already lost a lot of the kilowatt hours in the system, and those aren't, you know, they have to be paid for somehow. Going for the distributed generation, you're bringing the demand and the supply closer to each other. The problem, as you asked now, why hasn't it happened, is for 90 years, Eskom's 90 years this year, we've been doing it a certain way. We've been reticulating and transmitting electricity a certain way. To change that infrastructure, it's a huge investment, and I think Andrew quoted, you know, in the next 100 years we'll have change. So it is happening. It's happening all over Africa, but in pockets. It's not something that's going to happen overnight because we'd have to redo the whole infrastructure. We have huge 765,000 kV lines, transmission lines already to these sectors. So new developments will be following these routes and with associated benefits. But it won't happen overnight.
It won't happen overnight, but I'd like us to touch on costs perhaps, if we could delve a little bit further into that. No doubt the private sector can't work on this alone as a separate entity. Government needs to play a role, surely, Andrew?
Certainly, and the government are, and I think the government have made great strides, particularly in the off-grid, in the microgrid environment, to really push very hard. In fact, the electrification program is done under their auspices. We do a lot from an engineering and a technical point of view, but this is driven by the government very, very strongly. If I could just come back to the issue of cost again, I think what's really been extraordinary is the extent to which the technology cost has dropped over the last couple of years, particularly on photovoltaic panels. The other technology challenge has been around storage. So it's one thing to during blazing sunlight get electricity, but what you want to do is you actually want to store that for nighttime use, to power lights, etc. So those technologies have come on leaps and bounds, and also we're seeing costs reduced dramatically there. So I've no doubt that going forward we'll see parity, if not lower costs than compared to coal-fired power stations. And again, we're going to see a dramatic shift in the direction of renewable energies, microgrids, and a great opportunity again for Africa to leapfrog the traditional utilities such as Eskom and many other parts of the world.
You touched on renewable energy, and I'd like us to get there in a moment from now, but surely, Andre, the international participation here is very important. The technologies that Andrew mentioned are things that aren't technically innovated on the African continent. Are we seeing a lot more collaborative efforts between Africans as well as those abroad?
For sure. I mean, Nigeria is just a good example we talked about, and Nigeria is really leading this transition actually. And I just recently came back from a trip to Nigeria. We sit together with the Minister of Power, and if you go across Africa, every Minister of Power could be in South Africa, could be in Nigeria, could be in Ghana. They have a program what they call rural development. So they want to take technologies available and bring into those rural areas. And the money comes from different sides, right? The World Bank is funding something, the Europeans funding, Islamic Development Bank. So the thing is how you can make things happen on the African ground. This is very difficult because what you have to bring together is you have to bring together government, private, and the funding body, the money who has the body who has the money. To bring these together is really difficult. How we do it? We go for showcases, we go for pilots, we go for trials. And we just recently launched a showcase in Nigeria, close to Abuja, where we built up an energy hub. So we took existing technologies, solar panels, batteries, put them in a simple container. People can come to this place. And I think this is a human part of the lighting story, right? People come to this place, they recharge their mobiles, they use this as a public place for trading hours. People come with their tables, and start to trade their goods. But finally, it has impact to learners, to students as well, because they can play in the evening football. I think it's a very important aspect. It's technical, of course, on one side, but the impact to people is huge. And the way to go for it is to start a trial, to prove your concept, and then take it from there, starting with recharging mobile phones, going to trading, increased trading hours, mobile clinics, mobile schools. With those technologies, everything is possible, what wasn't possible in the past.
From an innovation perspective, are we seeing more of that from Africans themselves?
Yes, we do. I mean, if you look where we source our goods, it becomes more and more Africa. It is difficult still, but a lot of things are coming from Africa. The concept is there. It is proven. India, China, they proved it. So we can see that more and more governments ask for our engagement in production, in policy making, in developing to prove their own technology.
Barry, coming to you with regard to the innovation as well as getting all these different parties to sit down on at the table and discuss the energy changes and demands that are needed in a country like South Africa. Are we seeing enough of that taking place perhaps?
I personally don't think, I mean, it is happening, but innovation is one of the shortfall areas. It's very difficult for us to be innovative and take the innovation to the next step of manufacturing in an environment where you're competing against countries like China. A lot of our innovation has been exported to Vietnam, for example, on paraffin stoves and manufactured there just because of our labor laws in terms of minimum wages and so on. So there's a lot of work being done to try and stimulate innovation, but there are a lot of barriers that we have to overcome. I think the ideas, the concepts are definitely there. When it comes to lighting, I think the downstream products, so the actual light or lamp itself will come from a developed country, but the shade around it, there we're seeing a lot of innovation. So it's downstream, but it still has to be mainstream, and that is where the Department of Trade and Industry and other are putting a lot of funds into universities, tertiary institutions to try and accelerate innovation.
You touched that there is funding available, but there are a lot of barriers, as you mentioned, to the innovation, and you labels one of them that you listed. What are the others, and what is the key challenge there?
Well, we're part of a global society now. It is very easy just to Google a product and import it from wherever you want to get on a mail order. So it's very easy, very accessible to get anything you need right now. So the drive to become very innovative is not necessarily there. When you go into a deep rural area where people have not got access to certain things, you're seeing wonderful innovation. You're seeing people develop little mini hydro schemes. You're seeing people develop really good things that are fit for purpose there, but it's not brought back into the mainstream, commercialized and taken internationally because we're just finding it difficult to compete.
More importantly, are our intellectual properties protected in South Africa when it comes to that kind of innovation?
Yes, it is protected, but with that protection comes a lot of red tape to actually take it. If you're getting funding from a particular source, you're sharing the intellectual property with whoever's funding the product, and then to take that to the next step, that also becomes a problem.
Welcome back to the Philips African Dialogues, where we're discussing the solutions and partnerships needed to bring reliable, efficient and environmentally sound lighting and energy solutions to the African continent. I'm still joined by my guest here, and just before the break, Barry, we had touched on innovation in the South African country, and some of the barriers that hamper the innovation development as well as the protection of rights. And Bix, I'd like to get a Nigerian perspective on this matter. Are you seeing enough innovation coming through from the Nigerian energy sphere, and what about the protection of the new ideas as well as philosophies that might be unfolded in the Nigerian energy space?
I think I would like to say that our focus right away is to increase a certain level of supply, supply security and security of supply, diversity of fuel sources. So our focus essentially now is to bring in investment into the market. Down the stretch, and not too long from now, we'll be looking at indigenizing our policy so that whatever investments that take place in the power sector have a serious local content to it. It is at that point that we believe local creativity and innovation will kick in, but the appropriate laws for protecting those intellectual rights are already in place. But I suspect that we are more desperate to have more power first and then deal with the issues of how it impacts on local innovation and protection of rights. Our critical area of interest is to meet the yawning gap between supply and demand. And I think it's important that we get our priorities right. Thank you.
So you're settling on the foundation of the issue and then developing from there. Andrew, I'm not sure if you share the same sentiments from Eskom. Are you focusing on the shortfalls rather than developing innovation in the short term?
We'd have a different approach. From our side, we realized we have to do these things simultaneously. From a power security point of view, it would have been great just to forge ahead with coal-fired power stations indefinitely, because that is probably the fastest way, and we know that, and it's our traditional business. But we really do understand that the world has changed, and that we have to encourage renewable energy, and that's why we've got a massive program to encourage independent power producers to sell onto our grid. In the short term, it does mean additional costs which have come through, which have applied additional pressure to our tariffs, of course, and that doesn't make us very popular, but it's the right thing to do. We have to persist. We have to get the balance right between environmental responsiveness, the financial considerations and tariffs, and then energy security. So for us, there's unfortunately none of these which is more important than the other. We've got to solve this trilemma, as it's sometimes called, simultaneously. And the great thing about it is that energy efficiency is one of those measures which ticks all the boxes, and I think that's why I think from Eskom we're so adamant that we want to continue with our energy efficiency program, because once again it does all of this. It gives you the energy security by reducing demand. It's great for the environment, and of course great for especially in the pockets of the customers who participated, to see their bills come down. So
a lot of people will be happy about that.
Very much so. Very, very popular program that we'll certainly continue with and continue to promote. But again, it's about partnerships. The great work that Barry's doing at CNBC, the great work that Philips and other partners are doing as well. So it's a wonderful industry and a vibrant time that we work with. We also do work with other countries in Africa, especially the 14 countries surrounding South Africa in Southern African power pool. We often come together to talk about demand-side management and share expertise and knowledge about how best to do this. So it really is a very exciting future for all of us.
How difficult is that, though, Andrew, especially regarding the fact that legislation is not the same in a lot of the African countries?
It is surprisingly easy, strangely enough. To save electricity is a universally accepted priority, and I'm sure, Bex, I'd be interested in, Bex, for you to come in. We don't extend all the way to Nigeria, but I'm sure energy efficiency is as important there. And it really is thoroughly impressive to see what other countries are doing around, and how we actually exchange information and the synergies which are coming out. So it really is working very, very well, and surprisingly easy. This is a cross-border issue that's working phenomenally well.
Andre, nodding your head very strongly in agreement with this. But what have you seen when you travel across the countries? And we know that we're bringing renewable energy on board globally. Everybody wants more efficient power producing to take place. But are we doing it correctly? And what are some of the delays that are causing it to be backlogged?
This is what Andrew just described, what is world class actually. I mean, there are a lot of initiatives in place where, and let me give you an insight before. The consumer themselves, so the person in the street across Africa, will not change from GLS or from what we call incandescent lamp with a lot of consumption to LED. Technology is too expensive for this person on one side. On the other side, a lot of countries, they have very low electricity rates. So they support electricity actually, right?
Is South Africa one of them?
South Africa is not one of them. Maybe Andrew can give you more insight about how they make the tariffs, but one thing is very clear. You see, if you go to other countries in Africa, they purchase 1 million CFLI lamps, right? And they donate those lamps to the households, and they hope that the consumption goes down. The model what Eskom and Andrew implemented in South Africa, it's world standard, because what Eskom does in South Africa is they pay for energy savings. They don't pay for the lamp, for the LED or for whatever. They pay for the savings. So that guarantees that your lamp, actually what you purchase, ends in a socket and saves energy. And you will not find something like this across Africa, and I hardly found this somewhere else. But one thing is clear as well, right? The move to energy efficient solution is driven by the government across Africa, what is not the case in other European countries, for instance. And the reason is it's about education of people, and it's about making technologies affordable for those people. We are working on both, but the short-term saving comes by the government.
Just on that, I noticed that Eskom is offering incentives to a lot of individuals as well as companies, SMMEs included in that list, to ensure that they have more energy efficient means. But you mentioned the education, and when I was in school not too long ago, there wasn't any education regarding appropriate or rather energy efficient usage. How do we need to unfold that into the South African community? Maybe I can come to you on that, Barry.
A big problem. Education, consumer behavior. It's been proven worldwide in various countries, different percentages, but on average it's been proven anything between 25% and 32% savings can be achieved just by human behavior. No technology involved, no money involved,
25%.
Just by changing between 25 and 32. Some countries have got 32% savings just by educating the consumer about best practices and to do the basic things right. Because we've traditionally had very cheap electricity in South Africa, and it has changed over the last couple of years, there's never been that drive per se to save energy. Now we've got a shortage, we've got environmental impacts, a lot of pressure being placed on South Africa as a big emitter of carbon dioxide. Now it's changing. But the education at a school level, there are programs happening, there's definitely programs happening, but it's not part of the mainstream curriculum yet. We go to our universities, we don't find a course that you can take on an energy efficiency engineer, for example. You become an electrical engineer and you do a couple of modules on energy efficient lighting or whatever, and you then incorporate it into your engineering field per se. We're seeing in other countries, even developing countries, countries like Brazil, where you can actually go right up to a PhD in lighting per se at a tertiary institution. And that is the area where we've got to plant that seed at that level, change the way we teach our kids, and when they get into the mainstream economy, they'll be doing the right things. So.
Bex, I'd like to get your perspective on what's unfolding in Nigeria. Are we seeing more emphasis being placed on changing the mindset of how consumers use energy? Is that something that the government is investing in on that side?
I might also add that the closest parallel I see between the shift from current practice to more energy efficient practice is the shift from the black and white TV to the color TV. Whilst you will look at TV as slightly more luxurious utility, electricity is a utility that you cannot do without. But then, nevertheless, the migration from black and white to color required a little bit of customer level education, customer level knowledge and appreciation of the benefits that come to you when you migrate from one paradigm to the other. That underscores the requirement that customer engagement is very key if we want to anchor this change successfully. Whether we need it or not is given. Worldwide trend has proven that energy efficiency brings far more values at the environment level, at even long-term life cycle cost level, at various levels. The value of energy efficiency, even in demand-side management, in grid stability management, grid reliability issues, it has benefits way beyond the household that is the target. Because if we don't convince the household, then we'll never get any of the other derived benefits. So education is very key. Government leadership is extremely key. Sometimes even bringing part of their balance sheet to the program, because sometimes people will continue not to believe until they've seen a ripple effect of some sort. So government must take leadership to create that turning point, that tipping point, and then it becomes a culture of some sort. The regulator must be constantly be in play and to encourage investment, investors, developers with the kind of framework that will enable them to take the risk. Because it's all about taking a risk. It's all about going into a future that people can't quite see very clearly today. But if you get all the people together and they buy into it, down the stretch, everybody will look back and say, thank God you took this initiative. So the Nigerian government is has very great appetite for this shift from where we are to where we should be in terms of energy efficiency, in terms of the kind of electrical fittings and appliances that we use. So, but like I said before, I like to put us in perspective. We are just about rolling onto a purely commercial and market-sensitive industry. And so sooner or later, we will really overtake most of the expectations of people as a market. But we just have to do the right things from now going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bex. But Andre, coming to you, Philips, you've worked with educating the public as well as introducing new technologies. Without getting into the technical nitty-gritties of it, LED and CFL, that's the correct terminology if I'm not mistaken. Have you seen a positive response to how consumers are changing their behavior regarding electricity usage?
I mean, you have a couple of things. I think one thing is very right. You have to start very early in schools. And we have programs where we simply give CFLI energy saver lamps to school kids, and let's say, you can sell it now to your relatives, right? So the kids, they increase the awareness, because grandpa, of course, will buy 10 of the lamps from his grandson before he goes to a shop. So it's one part. Another part is, of course, I mean, even if you go to South Africa and you go to one of these DIYs and you are in front of this shelf, right? Still, even I'm lost. Right? It doesn't guide you to the right solution. What kind of color do I want? For what do I need my light? So we are working on this with shops to give a very clear guidance for what application you need, what kind of lamp. This helps you. But the biggest market in Africa is a traditional market. Traditional market, you will find everything. If you find fake products, they call themselves Philips, but they are not Philips, right? How can you as a consumer understand, is it a branded product from a known brand with quality? And how is this a fake product? And we are working with this, with the packaging themselves. We try to guide people via the packaging to the right solution. But finally, and this is one of the things what I think is very important, is the word of mouth is the most important thing. People have to believe that the new technology works. And I was recently in one of these DIYs, and the person came in, and there was a negotiation about should I buy LED lamps now or not, right? Because one customer says, no, don't buy. Eskom will provide you soon with new LED lamps because of the rebate program.
Okay.
And the other person said, no, do now, because you can save so much money that it makes sense to buy, because in 6 months you have a return of investment already in your private household. These kind of stories helps to bring the message across. This forum actually, I try to bring the message across. You move now and you will save energy for the rest of your life. These lamps, they last for 25 years, right? So you make really a decision for your life. And to bring this story across in South Africa is an easy task, because we get a lot of support. But if you bring this message across in Nigeria, it's more difficult. But if you go to DRC, then it becomes really hard to explain someone who has only 10 USD cents for a lamp to invest in a solution what lasts longer, what saves energy, and what gives better light.
And the cost to the consumer's pocket, maybe changing the technology, they might have to pay a premium on that, but long term, no doubt there are some positives to it, perhaps, Andrew?
That's exactly it. So the economics are extremely compelling. There should be no reason why anyone should go and buy an incandescent lamp. It's just, it's completely foolhardy. And of course, we would see that some customers would still, but we're seeing a massive change to households and businesses just doing the right thing. When your lamp blows, get the right lamp to replace it. It's just the right thing to do. It's not only about saving electricity, but as Andre said, lasting 25 years. You need never change your lamp again. In fact, a lot of light fittings that are now coming out come with a lamp actually hardwired into the fitting. You'll never need to change that lamp in its lifetime. That is how the future of the lighting industry is developing. So certainly we'll see, and the government at the moment have in fact put an extra tax, an import tax on incandescent lamps. So it will become more and more expensive to the sun tax, if you like, for wasting electricity. It's going to become more and more expensive and undesirable to go the wrong way. And already on shelf space, you're seeing LED taking over completely from what I've seen recently.
So if smoking and drinking aren't bad enough, then using the wrong lamps is also...
Smoke and drink is permissible, but wasting electricity is completely out of the question. So.
Indeed.
And the lighting's gone one step further. The government has actually put a date on banning the incandescent lamp in 2015. You'll not be able to buy it. Whereas cigarettes and alcohol, as long as you're prepared to pay that margin, you can still get it. Exactly. But the inefficient incandescent one it's been banned in a lot of countries around the world already. Australia has already phased it out, and in South Africa by 2015, you'll not be able to buy the inefficient one.
But if you do a really good job like they did in Nigeria, even if you don't ban GLS incandescent lamp right now, we can see that the consumption of incandescent lamp goes dramatically down. due to the fact that Nigeria takes care of a discussion of the education, and that means finally they go to CFLI lamps. They do the step without having the government behind. What I think is a really, really good development. I didn't expect this. So when we did our plans last year, we thought we go ahead with GLS. No, we don't. We can see a clear step to CFLI. So that means if you invest in education, if you raise awareness about those things, of those things, people take it up because the benefit is there immediately, and they enjoy a better life.
So true. I actually wish we had a sample of some of these lamps here so that we could identify which are the drinks and cigarettes to stay away from. Let's cross to our audience now. I'm sure some of you are burning with some questions.
Yeah,
if you could please just give us your name and title and which organization you're from, but maybe your jacket speaks for itself.
Yeah. So as you can see, I'm from Philips Lighting Africa. My name is Henk Rotman. I'm product manager lamps for Africa. Actually, my question is to you, Barry, because Andrew explained that Eskom is working closely to other countries. And given the situation we have here in South Africa, your organization must have gained a lot of knowledge and experience in energy efficiency. Are you also sharing that with the rest of Africa?
Thanks for the question, Henk. Unfortunately, our mandate as a state-owned entity reporting directly to the Department of Energy is different to a parastatal where Eskom is. Our mandate is to work within the borders of South Africa. We also believe that there's so much to be done in South Africa in terms of energy efficiency. You know, we'll be busy there for the next couple of years, but we do share information. We participate in the International Energy Agency, which then disseminates information on what's happening in South Africa. So we participate, but in real work, for example, the tax incentives that we've developed and we're working with government, those taxes are only applicable to the taxpayer in South Africa because we have different tax regimes. So our work is pretty restricted to South Africa, but sharing best practices with other countries.
Well, let's take another question from our audience member before I'd like to get Bex's insights on that, but another question perhaps from the audience.
My name is John Westermeyer. I've actually got a question for Bex in Abuja. And that question is, well, first of all, I welcome the fact that there's a privatization of the power producing industry in Nigeria. I think this is the right move for that particular country. And of course, as much as you add electricity to the grid, it's also a matter of managing consumption on the other side. And from my experience being in Nigeria, I see a lot of inefficient and low quality lighting being used in the market that's also finding its way to the markets. I was wondering what measures and steps are being taken to eradicate that from the market to move towards more efficient, better quality type lighting.
Thank you so much, John. Bex, if we could get your response to that question from John. I hope you have heard it clearly, but it's just with regard to measures as well as steps to ensure that efficient and quality lighting does make its way to Nigeria.
Yeah, from the Nigerian side, at the government level, there's consciousness that if we do not do the transition to energy efficiency, it will be a double loss because the customer pays more, it gets exposed to inefficient lighting, and we do not have the capacity release that comes from the demand side technology that we should get, the benefits that we should get. So government is putting together a policy that will be at different levels trying to engage with the customer and the industry so that we will have a strong energy efficiency policy in place. Not too long from now, I would like to say before the turn of 2014 ending, there should be a clear energy efficiency policy in this country that brings both industry, customer, the regulator, and developers into a clear policy framework. That will address the matter from the point of importation of the wrong kind of energy appliances and fittings to incentivizing customers to use the right fittings. So it is a work in progress, but I've given you the timeline when it should be landed as a policy framework, and that will guide both investors as well as developers in the market.
Bex, before you go, I'd like us also to touch on the first question that we had that Barry responded to. That's just with regard to the exchange regarding information and skills developed in one African country to another. I understand that naturally there are jurisdictions as well as some procedures and laws in place to avoid the cross exchange. But Have you picked up anything perhaps from any of the other African countries as to how to drive efficient energy usage in a country like Nigeria?
Yes, there's been a series of conferences that take place at different regional levels. The West African Power Pool is one of them, and I'm aware that there is a similar one in the South African side of the continent. Those conferences bring about peer reviews as well as share experiences. Definitely a lot of African practice look up to the South African model, which has gone through a much better, more mature market phase and has been able to overcome a few more learning experiences. So we would look forward to the South African practice to lead.
I'd like us to just briefly touch on the renewable energy space, which will come into focus as things unfold in the years to come. And Andre, just your perspective on how things are developing on that front on the African continent.
If you see the renewable energies across Africa, the first what comes to your mind, of course, is solar, right? Because there's the sun and everybody talks about this. And then what we just mentioned already before is how to store the energy is another one. And here comes in the efficient lighting, what is part of it. And you can see it's not only lighting, but will become more efficient. We talk about cooking, we talk about heating, and those kind of things. So the demand side is one part, the energy distribution is another part, but I think renewable energy has to come with efficient products, as could be lighting as well as anything else. This is the most important thing.
So new technologies being developed there to ensure that the outsourcing of those powers fold out efficiently, perhaps.
The combination with the new technology is what we just briefly touched on, is LED, right? So the LED, if you see a regular lamp, the GLS, the incandescent lamp, produces 90% heat and not even 10% light. And if you see what an LED lamp does, it's actually the opposite. It produces only 10% heat and 80%, 90% light. So you can imagine if you have such an efficient system, you need less electricity, you could put a battery, you could make it mobile. And I think this is, if this is powered by renewable energy, it's the most cleanest way to light up any area.
Amazing stuff happening. But before we let all of you go, I'd like to get everyone's closing remarks with regard to your future outlook for the energy space on the continent. And perhaps, Bix, we can start off with you. I know that there were some technical problems, but we've got you back and clear on the line now. Your outlook as to what we can expect over the next 5 years, or what you hopeful of seeing, the change that you're hopeful of seeing regarding the energy space in Nigeria as well as the rest of the continent. What is that?
Yes, thank you. I think I was cut off a bit. The point I'm making is that what the minimum requirement is a continental success. The continent must have enough electricity. That needs continental leadership, both at industry level and as well as at government level. At industry level, there will be a lot of expectation from South Africa, which is a leading country insofar as performance in the electricity sector is concerned. There will be a lot of leadership expectation from them to set best practice, to create conference environment, to teach other people how to navigate it. At the government level, again, we will think that the key economies of Africa, strong economies of African countries should come together regularly and fashion out a common solution, interdependent solution. We believe that we can actually design a continental policy where you produce power in one place for consumption in another because of the beneficial demographics in one country relative to the other. If one has a lot of gas, the other one doesn't have gas, you can do transmission and make sure that the other economy also has access, because it's not enough to just look at one or two countries. It will not address the solution. So I believe this session is very good in terms of creating awareness that the struggle should be a continental struggle, not just individual countries. And it is doable because we have the raw material resources, we have the population, we have the technology is not even so far off as it used to be. So it's just for us to be focused and do the right thing. Copy jurisdictions, copy methodologies, and do things with discipline. And in no time, I believe Africa would have enough electricity not to be called a dark continent. Thank you.
Powerful words there, Beck, so much so that you probably said it on behalf of all the panelists, but just to get everyone's closing views in 20 seconds. I take it you agree with Beck's assessment?
Well, absolutely. Very little to add to Beck's statement. Absolutely. What I would add is that I recall seeing a study of saying if instead of each country developing their own electricity infrastructure, if we really put our heads together and a pool, the benefit just in Southern Africa would be $100 billion that we've basically wasted through compartmentalizing electricity instead of having a very well interconnected grid, which is, of course, where I think we need to push. So in 5 years, our vision would be to a well integrated Africa, or certainly on the path to a well lit and well integrated African electricity industry.
Barry, very quickly, your views?
I do believe we're going to move towards renewable energies, but we should not wait for the big utilities to build large wind turbines and PV plants. We can do it in our houses and we can do it in our offices. We need to design our buildings correctly that we can optimize natural light. The sun is the best light. All lighting we use is trying to imitate natural light, which is the sun. We have to optimize that. Fortunately, my colleagues here will lose revenue by not selling products or selling energy, but that's the way to go.
Andre?
We're not afraid about this, right? Africa is a big continent. If you see it from the moon, it's actually quite dark. But let me elaborate on this. I 100% agree. But if you see that 20 to 40% of the energy consumed is by light, and if you can imagine that we can reduce this consumption by existing installation by 80%, you can see how much more we could use for industrialization and other things. And this is a task of Philips, just to reduce the demand that these guys can produce less and have more people, more happy people.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for sharing your insights for today. That's all we have time for this last edition of the Philips African Dialogues for 2013. Thank you to my guests, Andre Dimmel from Philips Lighting Africa, Barry Brendenkamp from Sanedi, Andrew Eitzinger from Eskom, and from our bureau in Abuja, Bex Dagogo Jack, Nigerian Presidential Task Force on Power there. Well, until next year, from myself, Kukuletu Mfupi, and my guests, it's goodbye.